Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
There are certain places on Earth that feel inherently sacred, and then there are places that feel inherently wrong. Places where the vast, open silence doesn't feel peaceful, it feels like it's listening. Monument Valley, with its majestic red buttes rising from the desert floor, is one of those places. It's a landscape of stunning, otherworldly beauty, but its isolation, its immense silence, and the deep history of the Navajo lands can also make it a setting for something far more sinister. I've collected 3 stories from people who drove through that iconic valley and found that sometimes you're not the only one out there in the vast, empty silence. This is the first one. Story 1. The Hitchhiker on the Valley Drive. This happened to my buddy, Chris, about 4 years ago. He was driving from California to the East Coast for a new job and had decided to take the scenic route through the Southwest. He's a photographer, so Monument Valley was a must-stop. He arrived at the View Hotel just before sunset, got a room, and planned to drive the 17-mile loop road at first light the next morning to get those classic shots with the long shadows. The next morning, he was up before dawn. He threw his camera gear in the passenger seat of his Jeep and headed out onto the dirt road. The air was freezing cold, and the sky was just starting to turn from black to a deep bruised purple. The massive buttes, Middens and Merrick, were just dark, hulking silhouettes against the growing light. He had the whole place to himself. It was exactly what he wanted. He drove slowly, windows down despite the cold, just listening to the sound of his tires on the dirt and the occasional creak of his suspension. He'd stop every few minutes to take a picture, the silence so profound it felt like it was pressing in on his eardrums. About 40 minutes into the drive, he rounded a corner near a formation called the Hub, and up ahead he saw something that made him do a double take. Standing on the side of the road was a woman. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes, a long, faded denim skirt and a heavy wool coat, way too heavy for the desert, even in the morning chill. She had dark hair pulled back tight from her face. She wasn't waving or signaling for help. She was just standing there, perfectly still, staring at his approaching car. Chris slowed down. This was a remote area. There was no visitor center out here, no other cars. How did she get here? The nearest town was miles away. His first instinct was to see if she was okay. He pulled up alongside her and leaned over to roll down the passenger window. "Hey, you all right? Do you need a ride back to the main road or to the hotel?" The woman didn't answer at first. She just slowly turned her head to look at him. Her face was pale, almost white, which was striking against the red dust all around. Her eyes were dark and seemed to look right through him. Finally, in a voice so quiet he had to strain to hear, she said, "I'm waiting." Chris felt a strange chill, one that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Waiting for what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice friendly. "My ride," she whispered. "He's coming. He's always coming." Something about the way she said it, the flat, emotionless tone, really started to creep him out. He glanced in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see another car approaching. The road behind him was empty, a trail of his own dust hanging in the air. "Look, it's really cold out here," he said, his voice a little tighter now. "Let me at least give you a lift to the park entrance. You can wait there." For the first time, she blinked. Her gaze seemed to focus on him, and a small, strange smile touched his lips. It wasn't a grateful smile. It was knowing. It was unsettling. "No," she said. "He's here." Chris felt his blood run cold. He looked forward, then in his mirror again. Nothing. He looked back at her. She hadn't moved. Her arm was still at her side, but her hand was now slightly extended towards the back of his Jeep, her fingers gently beckoning. Chris didn't wait any longer. His foot slammed on the gas. The Jeep fishtailed for a second in the loose sand before grabbing traction and lurching forward. He watched in his rearview mirror as the woman's figure grew smaller. She didn't turn to watch him go. She just stood there, now facing the opposite direction, as if watching something coming down the road from the other way. The last thing he saw before she disappeared in a cloud of his own dust was her arm, still extended, pointing past where he had just been. He drove the rest of the loop in a blur, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't stop for any more photos. He just wanted to get back to the hotel, to other people. He told the front desk clerk what he'd seen, expecting them to laugh it off. Instead, the clerk, a Navajo man, just got this real serious look on his face and asked Chris to describe her. When Chris finished, the man was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My grandmother used to tell stories about a woman who waits on the Valley Drive. She's not waiting for a ride. She's waiting for someone from her past, someone who wronged her a long, long time ago. They say on certain mornings, when the light is just right between worlds, she sees his truck coming, and when it finally arrives, she gets in, and neither of them is ever seen again." Chris never found out who or what that woman was waiting for, but to this day, he can't shake the feeling that when he sped away, it wasn't just a crazy woman he left behind. It was something that had been waiting for a very, very long time. And he was just lucky she wasn't waiting for him.
Story 2. The Sound in the Silence. My cousin, Mark, is an experienced hiker and outdoorsman. He's the kind of guy who feels more at home in the wilderness than in a city. So when he planned a solo backpacking trip through the Monument Valley Tribal Park, nobody was worried. He knew how to navigate, he knew how to pack light, and he knew how to respect the land. He got his permit, studied the maps, and headed out for a 3-day, 2-night trek through a more remote section away from the main tourist areas. His first day was incredible. The scenery was breathtaking. He hiked through sandy washes, scrambled over red rock, and set up camp as the sun set, painting the buttes in fiery shades of orange and purple. The silence was absolute. He loved it. He fell asleep under a blanket of stars so thick it looked like someone had spilled a litter across the sky. The second day, he decided to push deeper into a canyon he'd seen on the map. It wasn't a marked trail, just a dry riverbed that snaked its way between towering cliffs. The further he walked, the more the walls closed in around him, blocking out the sun for longer periods. It was cool, shaded, and eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft crunch of his boots on the sand. He'd been hiking for about 2 hours when he first heard it. It was so faint he thought he'd imagined it at first. He stopped walking. The sound stopped. He waited, listening to his own heartbeat. Nothing. He took another step. Crunch. Then, from somewhere deeper in the canyon, he heard it again, a single, clear sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of a baby crying. He froze. It was impossible. There was no way a baby could be out here. It was miles from the nearest road, in terrain that was difficult for an adult. He told himself it was an animal. A bobcat or a fox can make sounds that are surprisingly human-like. He'd heard that before. But this was a perfect, high-pitched, distressed wail. It was a baby, and it was in trouble. His instinct, his human instinct, was to help. He shouted, "Hello?" His voice echoed off the canyon walls, a hollow, lonely sound. The crying stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. He stood there, straining his ears, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then it started again, but it was different. It was closer, and it was moving. It was a series of cries, one after another, each one sounding like it was coming from a different spot along the canyon wall, sometimes from up high, sometimes from down low. It was as if something was circling him, mimicking the sound, getting a fix on his position. It wasn't a lost baby. It was a lure. Mark's survival instincts finally kicked in, overriding his curiosity. He turned around and started back the way he came, trying to walk, not run, to keep from panicking. But the sound followed him. It was always there, weaving in and out of the canyon's acoustics. Sometimes it would sound like it was right behind him, and he'd spin around expecting to see something in the shadows. But there was the empty, red rock corridor. He walked faster, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The crying was getting more frantic, more insistent. It was a desperate, wailing sound that clawed at his nerves. He broke into a jog, then a full-on run, his backpack bouncing awkwardly on his shoulders. He stumbled, fell, scraped his hands on the rocks, and scrambled back to his feet. He ran until he burst out of the canyon's mouth and into the open desert, the sun blazing down on him. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. He looked back at the canyon entrance, a dark gash in the side of a mesa. The sound was gone. There was only the wind. He didn't go back for his planned second night. He hiked straight back to his truck, not stopping, not looking back. He drove straight to the park authorities and told them what he'd heard. The ranger, a weathered man with kind eyes, just nodded slowly. He told Mark that the Navajo have legends about a creature, a chindi, or a spiteful spirit that can mimic human voices, especially the cries of a child, to lure the living into danger or to lose their way. He said that in places like that, where the silence is so deep, the land itself can sometimes remember echoes of old grief and play them back to you. Mark doesn't hike alone anymore, and he says he'll never, ever go back to a place where the only sound you hear is the one you know for a fact shouldn't be there.
Story 3. The Figure at the Fire. A few years back, a friend of mine from college, a guy named Dave, was on a road trip with two of his buddies. They were young, maybe 22, and thought they were invincible. They'd heard about the dark skies in Monument Valley and decided to skip the expensive hotels. They found a spot off the main highway, a dirt road that led to a semi-secluded area, and set up camp for the night. It was technically illegal to camp outside of designated sites, but they figured no one would ever know. They were in the middle of nowhere. They built a small fire as the sun went down, the flames dancing and casting long, dancing shadows on the surrounding rocks. They cracked open some beers, grilled some hot dogs, and just talked and laughed, enjoying the incredible view of the Milky Way. The silence was vast, but with the three of them there and the crackling fire, it felt comfortable, safe. Around midnight, the fire had died down to glowing embers. They were all lying in their sleeping bags, still chatting quietly, when one of Dave's friends, a guy named Mike, sat up abruptly. "Did you guys hear that?" he whispered. They all went quiet. Dave listened. He could hear the wind, a faint whisper over the sand, and then, from somewhere out in the darkness, he heard it too, a soft, shuffling sound, like footsteps on loose gravel. It was slow, deliberate. Shuffle, pause, shuffle. They all sat up now, staring into the blackness beyond the faint glow of the embers. The firelight was too weak to penetrate more than a few feet. The darkness around them was absolute, a solid wall. "You're being paranoid, dude," one of the other friends, Steve, whispered, but his voice was shaky. "It's probably just an animal, a coyote or something." But the sound continued. Shuffle, shuffle, scrape. It was circling them. Dave could hear it moving to the left, then behind them. It was getting closer. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight he'd brought and clicked it on, sweeping the beam in a wide arc. For a second, he saw nothing but sand, rocks, and scrub brush. Then, as the beam passed a large boulder about 50 feet from their camp, he saw it. A figure. It was human-shaped, standing completely still, silhouetted against the rock. It was impossible to make out any features, just a dark, solid outline. It was facing them. "Who's there?" Dave yelled, his voice cracking. The beam of light was trained right on the spot, but the figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It was just there. Mike grabbed another flashlight and shone it as well. 2 beams of light now illuminated the spot. There was nothing there, just the boulder. Dread, cold and heavy, settled in Dave's stomach. "I saw someone," he insisted. "Right there, I swear." The shuffling sound stopped. For a long, agonizing minute, there was nothing but the sound of their own terrified breathing. The silence was worse than the noise. Then, from the darkness on the other side of their camp, just a few feet from where their car was parked, a voice spoke. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, calm, and conversational. A man's voice. It said, "Cold night." The 3 of them screamed. They scrambled, a tangled mess of arms and legs, and practically fell into the car. Dave fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. Mike was in the passenger seat, staring out the window, whispering, "Go, go, go." Steve was in the back, already pulling the door shut. Dave finally got the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, and he slammed on the gas, sending sand and rocks flying. He didn't bother with headlights at first, just tore through the darkness until he found the dirt road and sped down it, not stopping until they hit the paved highway. They drove for an hour before they stopped at a gas station, their nerves shot. They never looked back, never tried to figure out what or who it was. They were just grateful to be alive. Dave told me later that the most terrifying part wasn't the shuffling, and it wasn't even seeing the figure by the boulder. It was the voice. It was so close. It's like whoever or whatever it was had been standing right next to them the whole time, just listening to them talk. And the thing he can't get out of his head is the simple, mundane question it asked. Cold night. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation, as if it had every right to be there, as if it was just another person sharing the same patch of empty desert. And that's what makes it so horrifying, because in that vast, empty, silent place, the only thing you should never, ever hear is a voice from the darkness, calmly stating the obvious, right before it steps out of the shadows.